What would you call a man who couldn't pay his rent on time, but who could paint this? What would you call an artist who couldn't keep track of deadlines, who left patrons waiting for months, but then delivered this? What about someone who answered an insult from a rival by writing libelous poems, but could also paint this? Or a man who, after committing one of the most serious crimes imaginable, threw away his only chance of redemption, but who then created this? If you look closely at this person's life, you'll see a pattern that perhaps millions, if not billions of people would recognize immediately. This is the story of Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, and the 5 traits that shaped his art, his brilliance, and his self-destruction: inattention, hyperfocus, impulsivity, emotional dysregulation, and rejection, sensitive dysphoria. Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio was born in 1571 in the small town of Caravaggio, near Milan. The eldest of 6 children, he wasn't born into wealth, but his family had connections. His father, Fermo Merisi, worked as a household steward for local nobility, respectable, steady work that promised the boy a modestly secure future. Then the plague struck. By the time he was 6, Caravaggio's father, grandfather, and several relatives were all dead. For a time, he still had his mother, Lucia, who held the family together as best she could. She encouraged her son's artistic leanings and instilled in him a deep reverence for all that is sacred and holy. But when Michelangelo was 13, she too contracted the plague. She recognized the symptoms immediately, and within 3 days, she was gone. In that short window, she found the strength to arrange an apprenticeship for her eldest son with an artist named Simone Petrazzano, a painter who had once studied under Titian. For the next few years, Caravaggio painted, and painted, and painted. He would scrape by selling street scene paintings, gamblers, cheats, pickpockets, anything that inspired him and would move quickly. One of them, the card sharps, changed everything. Cardinal Francisco Maria del Monte first saw the card sharps in a dealer's studio and was stunned by the way Caravaggio elevated con men and cheats with the same gravity other painters reserved for saints. The cardinal bought it on the spot and asked to meet the artist. Within days, Caravaggio found himself living inside of the cardinal's palace, the Palazzo Madama, surrounded by musicians, diplomats, and power brokers. In July of 1599, Caravaggio received the commission that would change everything: the Contarelli Chapel. Over the next year, Caravaggio painted both the Calling of St. Matthew and the Martyrdom of St. Matthew. When the chapel finally opened to the public in July of 1600, the reaction was seismic. Within months, Caravaggio was pulled across town to Santa Maria del Popolo Sorrisi Chapel to paint the Conversion of St. Paul and the Crucifixion of St. Peter. His first versions were late and rejected by the patrons, forcing him to repaint both works from scratch. And while racing towards those deadlines, Caravaggio kept accepting new commissions, contracts he abandoned or delivered so late that patrons moved on. Around this time, another painter named Giovanni Baglione was watching closely. He and Caravaggio moved in the same circles, painted for the same patrons, and even competed for similar church commissions across Rome. But while Caravaggio's raw realism electrified the city, Baglione's more polished, mannered style began to feel dated. By 1602, Baglione took a commission for Sacred and Profane Love, a direct response to Caravaggio's Amor vincit omnia. The resemblance wasn't subtle, and neither was the spite. At the bottom of Baglione's canvas writhed the demon unmistakably modeled on Caravaggio's own face. All of Rome saw it, and for someone less raw, it may have been a passing embarrassment, but for Caravaggio, it was an unpardonable desecration. And so Caravaggio retaliated by flooding Rome with vicious poems, mocking Baglione's pride, his reputation, and his talent. In response, Baglione sued Caravaggio, and in 1603, Caravaggio was dragged into court on charges of libel. Caravaggio shouted over testimony, baited the judge, and ultimately made a spectacle of himself. He escaped without serious punishment, but his reputation took another blow. Years after Caravaggio's death, his old enemy Giovanni Baglione wrote the first biography of him, ensuring the man he once sued for libel couldn't return the favor. Rome had seen that Caravaggio wasn't only brilliant, he was also volatile, thin-skinned, and dangerous to cross. One night in 1604, while dining in a tavern in Rome's Trastevere district, a waiter brought him artichokes. Caravaggio asked which were cooked in butter and which in oil. The man didn't know, so Caravaggio smashed the plate over the waiter's head and attacked him. Historical records of this time are littered with examples of Caravaggio's arrogant and violent behavior. He brawled in taverns over trivial matters such as spilled wine, drew his sword in busy city streets over petty insults, and even slashed his landlord's wooden door to splinters after the man had the nerve to demand rent. Each time, powerful patrons, chief amongst whom was the powerful Cardinal del Monte, bailed him out because his genius was valuable and order was replaceable. Instead of learning restraint, Caravaggio began to believe that his divine gift also provided divine protection. There was, however, one particular time when even his talent couldn't save him. In early 1606, Caravaggio suffered what may have been the deepest wound of his career, the rejection of the Death of the Virgin. The painting had been commissioned for the Carmelite Church of Santa Maria della Scala. It was meant to glorify the Virgin's passing, a sacred moment of purity and transcendence. But Caravaggio seemed to despise the so-called safe traditional approach. Instead, he painted the event as it might have appeared when it actually happened over 2,000 years ago, before Mary was acknowledged as the Mother of God. She wasn't the radiant figure draped in light that centuries of painters had turned her into. In fact, the only indication of her divinity is the faint halo above her head. She was a woman who had lived, aged, suffered, and died. So in Caravaggio's version, the people around her don't treat her as holy. They don't gaze upward in awe. They simply grieve, bewildered, exhausted, unsure of what to do now that she was gone. In addition to this, rumors soon spread that Caravaggio had used the corpse of a drowned Roman prostitute named Anna Bianchini, a woman who modeled for him many times before and with whom he was rumored to have had a romantic relationship, as his model. To the friars, the implication alone was unthinkable. To them, this was not devotion. It was indecency, a provocation disguised as honesty. What the friars couldn't see, and what Caravaggio himself may not have been entirely aware of, was that the death of the Virgin may have been a personal act of mourning. The Virgin Mary lies there, as Caravaggio's own mother once did, her body heavy with death, her face emptied of everything but quiet surrender. The same bare feet, the same stillness, the same terrible peace that had stared back at him when he was 13 years old, watching the plague take her. He wasn't painting theology, he was painting memory, and the church mistook that memory for blasphemy. By mid-1606, that professional rejection had fermented into rage. Ranuccio Tomasone was no anonymous stranger. He was a very well-connected enforcer tied to the powerful Orsini family, one of Rome's most influential dynasties. The two men had crossed paths many times before. Gambling debts, women, and wounded pride kept pulling them back into conflict. Such was the case on May 28th of 1606. The two had put aside their differences long enough to play a round of tennis against each other. On a tennis court, on the Campo de Palacorda in Rome. Tempers flared and swords were drawn. Few specific details remain other than the most important one. Ranuccio Tomassoni did not survive the encounter, and Caravaggio ran. He was convicted in absentia for the death of Ranuccio Tomassoni. Pope Paul V issued a bando capitale, a sentence that placed Caravaggio beyond the protection of the law, stripping him of all legal rights and leaving him completely exposed. He fled south to Naples, in part because it lay beyond direct papal control. Word quickly spread that the most gifted painter of his generation was responsible for a man's death. And rather than recoil, Caravaggio found patrons who were intrigued by a man that could use his sword as well as his paintbrush. Ironically, his patrons in Naples were of the very same social class as Ranuccio Tomassoni, rich, decadent, and elite. Working for them kept him alive, but it also humiliated him. Like spectators paying to watch a trained animal perform, his patrons protected him from papal decree not out of loyalty, but because his genius was for hire. So if his talent was the only currency they valued, he paid in full. During this period of reluctant obedience, Caravaggio produced some of the most powerful works of his career: The Flagellation of Christ, Madonna of the Rosary, and most consequentially, The Seven Works of Mercy, a painting so arresting it drew the attention of the Knights of St. John, an ancient order whose power and influence offered him something he no longer had: the possibility of absolution. To join their ranks was to trade chaos for control. Every gesture was regulated, every impulse restrained, and in return, he was promised legitimacy, protection, and the possibility of redemption. But Caravaggio had never learned how to live within imposed restraint, and now restraint defined the boundaries of his world. Beyond Naples lay papal territory and lawful execution. With little room left to move, he turned toward the very structure he despised and sought the order's favor. He painted one of the largest works of his career: the beheading of St. John the Baptist. The painting stunned the Knights of St. John with its severity, its scale, and its discipline. And they rewarded him by granting him entry into the order in July of 1608. Everything held together for about a month. In August of 1608, for reasons lost to history, Caravaggio violently attacked a senior knight named Giovanni Rodamente Roero. The consequences were swift and severe. He was arrested and imprisoned in Fort St. Angelo, a fortress considered nearly inescapable. Yet little more than a month later, he escaped. Caravaggio was free, but now he was hunted by both the Catholic Church and the Knights of St. John. Paranoid, exhausted, and with fewer places left to turn, he returned to Naples. But even Naples could no longer shield him. One evening in late 1609, as he left a tavern known as the Osteria del Soriglio, Caravaggio was ambushed and brutally slashed across the face, an attack widely believed to have been orchestrated by the Knights of St. John as delayed retribution. In the aftermath of the attack, Caravaggio, bruised, scarred, and cornered, painted David with the head of Goliath. The severed head in the painting is his own, and serves as a confession and a plea to the Holy Church in Rome for mercy. One day, in 1610, word reached Caravaggio that the Pope might consider a pardon, on condition that he return to Rome in person. Caravaggio loaded a boat with his newest paintings and set sail toward Rome. He never arrived. Somewhere along the Tuscan coast, fever, infection, or perhaps even revenge claimed his life. Caravaggio died at just 38 years old, hunted, scarred, and exhausted. Michelangelo Merisi did not survive his life. Caravaggio did. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. Leave a comment down below, and I'm curious, what are your favorite Caravaggio paintings? Include those in your comments, and until next time, stay focused.